Hi, everybody. My name is Debbie, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Debbie.
And welcome to the workshop entitled Working with Others. It's the third in this series. And even though the date hasn't been determined, the next workshop will be on corrections. So I know we have some other things coming up, like there's been talk about a weekend with Tom going through the steps. So again, that hasn't been determined when, but be sure that we have your email address current or your snail mail. See Jack, he's going to be the gatherer of data, and so that we can get that out to you and make sure you know about that. The format today will be 2 75-minute sessions with a break in between, lunch at 11:45, and then 2 more sessions with a break in between. To get us back to our seats in a timely manner, Rick R. will be our town crier, and even though he doesn't have a bell, he will cry loudly. So be listening for him. The CDs sets of today's workshops are available for $20, and you can again see Jack, who you all met at the front door, for CDs of this workshop or any of the 2 past workshops. He can certainly get those for you as well. We have raffle tickets again today for a first edition of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. Yep, the tickets are $1 each or 7 for $5, and there's no limit to the number you can purchase. So to see tickets, either see Sean or Debbie. We've got Sean and Debbie. They will be all around all day. The restrooms are located just inside the church on your right. There will be time for questions. And I'm sagging here. There will be time for questions as Tom, goes through each week program. And if you would, please take a moment to silence any of your communication equipment. That would be appreciated. All right. It is my great pleasure, once again, to introduce to you Tom I. Hey!
Well, good morning. It's good to see you. Tom, you're an alcoholic.
Hi, Tom.
I have to travel a long way to get anybody to listen to me. North Carolina, they won't have too much of me. It is good to be here. Good to be back, and typical kind of a California morning. Just absolutely another day in paradise, and it is nice to be here. It's nice to be off the plane. One of my fellow travelers, we just learned we were on the same plane last night. And it was the airplane to hell. It turned out to be, but we made it. We made it. We hung in there. So it is neat to be here. Let me just elaborate just a little bit more on that agenda. And those of you who know me know that I'm not a precise type of a guy. I really like to kind of visit and let things happen. I don't have a preconceived notion of exactly how I want to do something. I know what I want to do, but it's not exactly how I want to do it. But roughly, what I want to do is the first part is I want to just like always. I'm not a teacher, and I'm not real fond of teachers in AA because it just doesn't seem to fit. That our stuff works best when we come from a base of experience. So I want to use in the first session a good bit of my own personal experience in dealing with sponsorship, and then just talk in some little broader terms about sponsorship and all the stuff of it. And in the second session, I want to see if we can do, I know we can, but it's a little bit difficult in a larger crowd, but I want to do a brainstorming session with you about looking at sponsorship from the standpoint of what it takes to develop good, strong, quality sponsorship. What are the ingredients? And so I want to do a little brainstorming thing on that. And we'll introduce that when we get to it. But I think, Rich, you tell me if this is not a realistic plan. It's too late to change it, but I'd like to know if it's not I'd like to know if it's not realistic. That I'll go into more detail on that, but one of not belabor it with a moving mic like we've done in previous workshops, because that ties it up a bit. And we have to be conscious of the recording that's going on because if you give somebody a CD and it's filled with questions or answers to no questions, that is maddening. It's useless. So we'll do that, and so ask you just to make your input real to the point, soundbite style input, and you'll see that as we start to get into it. In sponsorship, it's really sometimes it's one of the most thrilling things in AA. Other times it's one of the most heartbreaking things. It kind of struck me this morning that Kent greeted me this morning with two pieces of news. One was telling me about a new guy that he did a 12-step call on just recently, and the thrill of watching this fellow come alive and just be enthused and invigorated and jumping in this thing with both feet, and that's a thrill. Our book visits that. It says that working with folk and seeing that happen is an experience you must not miss, and you don't want to miss it if you ever have that thrill of watching somebody come back to life right in front of you. And it is absolutely a great, great experience. At the same time, it can be one of the most heartbreaking things. The other piece of news he gave me was that a guy that I tried to sponsor just a while back had died yesterday. And he died of the illness that takes the overwhelming majority of us out. And that's chronic alcoholism. And so he died at, I believe he was 67. And just never could quite surface and get hold of this thing. And his daughter is a member of our home group. And so anyway, in working with people and in sponsorship, it really does get to be either the thrill of victory or the agony of defeat. And so it contains both of that. Both of them can be strengthening, but they are truly the polar opposites of this. I was a guy, when I came into AA, I was not a natural for sponsorship, and probably not a peculiar species in that most of us, I think, tend to be a little bit antsy about jumping into an intimate, close, personal relationship with somebody when we're coming out of what's very often severe isolation and barriers and distance between me and other people, and that's certainly the way I was. And when I started thinking about sponsorship, I'd heard about it all the time, but when I started thinking about it, it was a little bit of a stretch for me. I wasn't even to the point of being able to really relish being involved in fellowship. That was a little bit too close for me. And then we start talking about getting one human that I'm going to let really get into my knickers. That was a little bit of a stretch, and so I didn't jump on the idea right off the bat. And I always marvel at people who do just jump into it day one, and kind of envy them in a way. But that certainly was not my experience. And so I was a guy that just was not a good setup for it. And I've had 4 sponsors during my recovery. The first one, I didn't really call him a sponsor. Some of you know that I found AA in a correctional facility, and that's not a great place for having intimate relationships. They sometimes get a little weird. So there's a natural kind of a distance there that ain't bad, but it does create some stuff. And so as I started thinking about sponsorship, I didn't get into a sponsor. What I got into was a really close, important relationship with a fellow member. Never did use the term sponsor. Didn't even think in terms of sponsor. But this was a guy that he was considerably older than me. Everybody was considerably older than me then. I was 24 years old, and so I certainly felt like I was a sort of an oddity in a geriatric museum, is what it looked like. And so I saw this guy and just developed a friendship. You know how some people, when you meet them, you just feel comfortably connected right off the bat. I mean, you talk with them just like you've known them all your life. There are others that are just kind of hard to work up to, but he was one of those that I was just comfortably in place with him. And so we became real close friends in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I used him much like you would a sponsor. And we didn't put any formality to that, but just the thing of interaction. Well, what does he mean by that? What does that mean? And how do you do this? And all of the stuff that would be of sponsorship was involved in that first relationship. It was tremendously important to me. This was somebody that I trusted. This was the person that I took my fifth step with. And so this was a very close, intimate relationship, as much as it would be had we called it a sponsor. You don't have to name it to claim it, and so it had the value. Ironically and tragically, this guy, just like I mentioned earlier about the sometimes good news, sometimes bad news, this fellow left the institution long before I did, and he took up the old life and died drunk a few years later. Not even a few years later, a few months later. But it didn't diminish one iota the value that he had to me. Cause what we got here is a daily reprieve, and it's very well demonstrated every day that we live in this program. But that didn't take away anything. And before, he never was a sponsor. It took me about a year to get to a point that I could really ask somebody about sponsorship. And I was kind of bedeviled by it. I wanted to get into that because everybody said it was such a wonderful thing. And so there was a guy. He just happened to be the guy who spoke at my first meeting. And he was a wonderful, charismatic, dynamic, absolute bundle of enthusiasm. He was not a pretty boy at all. He was a poster boy for the throes of alcoholism. He was a real beat-up looking dude, and was about as distant from me in terms of how you would relate as a guy could possibly be. But somehow or other, that spirit kind of got through to me, and I connected with that guy. And finally, it took me a year, but I finally secured him as a sponsor. And he was a wonderful guy. He was a wonderful, really genuine leader in AA. When I first met him, I thought he was kind of maybe had a few drinks too many. I thought the guy was a little whacked out. And but he was a guy who'd been beat up by life quite a bit. He had been a very unsuccessful professional boxer at one time. And the evidence was plain to see. But he was just one of those guys. You see people that are just so enthused, they just trip over themselves. They're just so exuberant and all that stuff. And that's the way he was. And that's what appealed to me about him. It was I didn't identify with his previous life, but what I was attracted to was what he put out, the energy and the spirit and the drive that he put out. And so I grabbed him. And he remained. I never have fired a sponsor. That's a totally alien term to me. I don't know how in the world do you fire somebody from a spiritual relationship. It just seems like a sort of a gross misuse of a term. And I never have really had to get rid of one. Father Time's taken care of it. That every one that I had either died or one went into Alzheimer's. And but I never have had to terminate one. My first one died, and then Shai, that was the name of my first real sponsor. He stayed my sponsor till he died, and I'm somebody who from the time, even though I didn't call it that, from the time I really got my feet on the ground in AA, I've never been without a sponsor. I've never had to look for one because they've always been readily apparent. And they didn't know it, but I already had them picked out before I needed them. So, in fact, I've got my next one picked out right now. If I need him, the one I've got says that he's going to outlive me, We'll see. But I will not be caught short on that. Let me tell you about the other guys. That first guy's name was Ed, and he really was. He was a marvelous, warm, knowledgeable, genuine counselor. And he had great value to me. Had a lot of insight. He was not a trained counselor, but he was a program developed wise counselor. Did a lot of good work for me. That second guy was a dynamic leader in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's what really penetrated me. He was a guy that was a go-get-'em type of alcoholic. I mean, he was somebody that took the hill, and it didn't matter whose hill it was. I mean, that guy was ready to go, and really got charged up in every aspect of Alcoholics Anonymous. The day I met him and diagnosed him as a village idiot, he was the state delegate for the state of Michigan. Which may verify the suspicion, either before or after, one or the other. He was just that kind of a guy, the kind of guy that would just charge you up just being around him. That he was one of those people that could walk in a room and he would light it up. He didn't have to do a thing, not a single thing. He could just walk in. There are people like that absolutely just charge the environment the minute they walk in. Others that improve the quality of the room by leaving. But Shai was one of those guys that was just a marvelous man, and he coached me through a lot of difficult stuff. I'll give you just an example of a kind of thing where a sponsor can be critically important. Now, when I was a gung-ho AA member, when I got into this program. Even in the institution, I was a gung-ho. I emulated my leaders, and so I was a gung-ho guy. And I wasn't real strong, but I'd take the hill too. And I'd probably lose the battle, but I'd darn sure charge it. And so I was a good, strong member. And when the time came for me to be released, I truly knew that AA was my lifeline. I knew that was the only way that I would survive, and I had absolutely no question about that. I mean, I knew that I was alcoholic, that was the most troubling thing in my entire life, and if I didn't deal with that, you could thump it up on the rest. So I knew I was absolutely committed to what I needed to do. But, that can be a fragile thing, eh? It can be a fragile thing that, all you have to do is change your mind, and what you know as an absolute conviction can disappear. They become weak and shaky instantly. It's just the tiniest little thing. And so when I started thinking about being released and making a new start and all that kind of thing and getting a transition done, I was going to have to go from Michigan, where I was housed, to North Carolina. They wouldn't let me stay in Michigan. And so North Carolina won the lottery, and so they said, go there. And now I knew nobody in AA in the entire state of North Carolina. And so I did what, back then you could, world directories were not quite as guarded as they tend to be right now. And so I had access to a world directory. And so I looked up North Carolina, looked up the town where I would be living. There were 2 groups listed there. And one of them listed 25 members, the other one listed 12 or 15, but a smaller group. So I naturally wrote to the bigger group. The bigger's got to be better. And I hadn't learned the difference in that. But I wrote to that group, and basically all I said was that, I'm a guy that's originally from North Carolina, and I'm up here in Michigan, and I just wanted to get in touch and see if it'll be okay if I come to your meeting. I wasn't asking for anything. I didn't want a job or money or a loan or advice or anything. I just said, is it be okay if I come? Because when you're in a situation like that old uncertainty about the receptivity of people, it lingers, And so when I wrote that letter, I waited for the answer, and that's been something like 48 years ago. And I'm still waiting, but not with anxiety. I don't think they're going to write. Yeah. But now that kind of burst the balloon a little bit, because I'm all pumped up, and I've been seeing these missionaries from AA coming in there, and I thought, yeah, these guys that come in here, they're okay. But they got another bunch out there that don't want folks like me coming in. And that was exactly the way I felt. And so the balloon was burst, and I thought, boy, this is something else. And I communicated that. Fortunately, I talked with my sponsor about it. And he told me what's obvious now, but it's not obvious when you're looking at it and seeing the examples I was seeing and then dealing with that reality. And so I talked with him about it, and he said, you know what you got to realize, Tom, that every AA group is not the same. That you get all kinds of things that fly this flag. Some of them are flagships, and some of them just ain't. And he said also groups quit existing sometime. They're not guaranteed permanence. So you got to realize there's a lot of things that can go wrong with that. But it took a while, for me to get centered in that enough, and thank God for good, solid sponsorship, because he advised me about stuff like that and helped me understand, not just follow some command to write another letter, but he helped me understand the deal. So I said, okay, I'm going to try it. And thank God I started a year before I had to make the transition. I wrote again to the smaller group, and this time I got a letter quicker than the mail could run. And what they did was respond in the same spirit that I wrote, and just told me about the group and said, you'll be welcome here. An unbelievable line in there said, we want you and we need you. Well, that was a heck of a message, I couldn't believe it. What are you going to need me for? Good God, you got enough bad cases down there, whoever they are. And so that was just kind of a startling thing. But imagine what a message, to what I'm thinking. That that you got a bunch of stuffed shirts out there that don't want to mix it up with roughnecks, and here's one saying we want you and we need you. I didn't know how true that was. That they really did need somebody, and so but I was home. I knew where I was going. We agreed, and I had a contact set up with an old guy that it was not he was not the one who wrote me the letter, but it had another guy in the group that was going to meet me. And so the first thing I did when I got to North Carolina was contact that old man, and then I'm home free. And I won't go into all the details of it, but the fellow who wrote me the letter was a marvelous guy who became my third sponsor, and he was a really marvelous fellow. But that got me going. And maybe in the second part of this, we'll talk a little bit more about that business of the excitement and the drama and the unbelievable experiences of getting AA going in a city. That's an experience that, they're hard to find. It's hard to find that experience now, but it's an absolutely great experience, and taught me something about 12-step and sponsorship and things like that in a very real sense. So you kind of see that change. They had the guy that was my fellow group member in the place, the leader who stepped in when I asked him to step in. He stepped in and then helped me sort of blend this with the real world, with the rest of AA, and helped me get through a pretty good critical time. And that fellow who wrote the letter gave me so much hope and so much real commitment. He was a remarkable man. His name was it wasn't his name, but what he was called was Barney. That was before Andy Griffith, so he wasn't named after that Barney. Barney, he was a great fellow, brilliant guy. He was an Air Force fellow that was in the. Well, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. Anybody old enough to remember the Bimini projects when the I see a couple of dots. They were starting to mess with the bum, and they were checking out radiation and all this kind of stuff, and they were doing it a safe distance away, they thought. Well, my sponsor demonstrated that he was the right kind of guy, a real rocket scientist. He sat down on a crate that was filled with radioactive material. That's not real smart. That stuff really does do some damage. And so he was a guy that got one of the early cases of nuclear radiation through his hip area. And this was before hip replacements had been invented. But his were gone for all practical purposes. And so he was an early casualty and a wonderful guy. He was supposed to never walk again. He had some dramatic surgeries and all this kind of stuff, and they didn't have the state-of-the-art stuff then. But he'd been made functional, but he was never supposed to walk. And he taught himself to walk against orders. He was not supposed to even get up. When I met him, personally, he was in a wheelchair. He was very mobile in that thing. He could wheel and deal in that thing, but he wasn't supposed to be walking, and so he's in a wheelchair. And then I watched him go from wheelchair to those two cane things that people use. He moved up to that, and to crutches, and then to that, and at the same time he's starting to get his life back together. He suffered from not only nuclear radiation but from Johnny Walker radiation too, and so his career was sort of in the doldrums, but he was a real capable kind of a guy, and so he started getting back into his employment, and wound up as a major manager for Burlington Industries. That he was in charge of some whole division. I never did understand it all. In the course of all of this stuff, he learned to fly an airplane. Yeah. Now here's a guy that's never supposed to even crawl hardly, and he's out here. That's the kind of guy he was. Just a real solid, real performing, capable guy. It's said here that if we do the actions in this program, we'll get restored to our rightful place in society, and sometimes far beyond even our wildest expectations. He was one, and he wound up a huge leader. The downside was that shortly after I went to town, he moved away, and so he continued to be my sponsor. He was. I've always had some distance in my proximity, except for the first one with sponsors, and I kept him. I kept him for a long time, and then it was on the occasion of my 35th anniversary in AA, and some folks wanted to put together a little hootenanny, and I grudgingly conceded, and so here we went, and so he was my sponsor, so he came down, and in the course of it, he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, "I need to talk to you." Well, my first thought is, now what have I done? And so he took me over in the corner and he said, "I got to get something straight. Do you sponsor me or do I sponsor you?" And I said, uh-oh. Now, I knew he had the beginning of Alzheimer's, and it was obvious, that something was going to have to happen. And now I didn't fire him. My God, what an insult, eh? Didn't even consider that. But I had to have a viable sponsor. That's very important to me. I want to be connected. I want to be connected. And my sponsor is my most tangible connection to Alcoholics Anonymous. That's my linchpin. That's the thing that ties me in and puts skin on it. It makes it very real. And so it's very, very important. And so I thought about that a long time, and I was not at any critical point, but I just like to have a viable relationship. And so I finally got my fourth one and my current one. And now I didn't fire the guy. I retired him to a place of honor. So then I got my next one, and he's a guy that Yeah, interesting thing happens when you get a little senior in the program. Yeah, well, a lot of things happen. I just went down to I would hate to admit it, but I went to Mississippi, and to an old timers convention, and their purpose is to gather up every old goat they can find, and they kind of have a soiree with celebrating age or something. Well, I was the oldest rat in that barn. I thought, my God, man, I never meant for anything like this to happen. It's a weird thing, you know. I thought, hey, guys, where are you? Come in. But there's some up and down sides to that sort of thing. That's more and more often the case. But there's a downside is that when it comes to something like sponsorship, it poses an interesting kind of a challenge. Where do you get them? Where do you get them? Now, if you got a criteria for it, and that's what we'll be talking about some in the next session, if you got a criteria for it, which I do, then start looking and you find it hard to find. Like my criteria roughly is, I want somebody senior to me. I know there's no magic in that, but somehow it just sort of produces a little level of respect just for staying power, if nothing else. I want somebody senior to me. And so as you get older, you know if you're the oldest rat in the barn in Mississippi, you're not going to find it just next door. And so what I did, I want not only senior to me, I want somebody that is truly active in Alcoholics Anonymous. I want somebody who has a legacy to talk about of what I used to do. I want somebody that's current and that's active in Alcoholics Anonymous in every element of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not a one-dimensional type of fellow. I believe that there are three legacies in our program, all of which are valuable to my own personal recovery. That's the legacy of recovery, the legacy of unity, and the legacy of service. And so I want somebody who is viable, who is active, who is strongly involved in all of those areas. So when you start putting that kind of stipulations on your criteria, you see you're going to get an even smaller pool to draw from. I want somebody that's enthusiastic about AA. Deliver me from solemn old dudes. I'll probably get to be one day, but I'll try to avoid hanging around with frisky people. I want to have somebody who's alive, who's got spirit, who's got something that just sort of demonstrates that sobriety is not a bad idea. And so I look for that in people. And somebody that's a leader. I want somebody that's willing to get out of the ranks and step ahead and tackle things that need to be done. And so when I started looking, it's what I did was just started drawing increasing circles from where I stood. And obviously, I'd rather have one in the same town. But since I'm the oldest member there, it's a little hard to find. And then I circled it out. And considering that criteria, if I had to do it today, there are 2 men and 1 woman in North Carolina that are senior to me. Well, that narrows it down to 2. Because, I think men with men and women with women. And I love Lib, but I ain't going to ask her to sponsor me. She's 92, so I think it'd be safe. But but it just isn't what I want to do. And she's my great colleague. And the 2 guys are just not viable. One of them has sort of become a religious guy. Fine if that's what rattled him, then go for it. But that's not my trail. That's not where I want to go. And the other fellow, I don't know if he's ever been to a meeting outside of the building his group meets in. And and he couldn't spell service with a thesaurus. So I mean that's not even a consideration. Yeah. So see what happened when you start drawing the circle. You know that you got a limited number of candidates, and when you look at the criteria, it limits it even more. And so I just kept drawing circles, and I finally wound up in a of all places, Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. That's where I found my guy, and it kind of served him right with to be my sponsor. I went up there in '65 to they have a conference up there. It's called a Gateway Roundup, and I was the first outside speaker they ever brought in. You know, where they bought an airplane ticket and brought in some guy. The first one they ever had, and my grand sponsor, who just died, he died at 92, and he was a tough man. Tough man. He was a pit bull. You know, he had no finesse whatsoever. I mean, none. And the worst threat you could make to an alcoholic in Prince Albert, his name was Elmer. The worst threat was Elmer's basement. Now that was the last stop before total confinement. And I guarantee you a lot of drunks have sobered up in Prince Albert just to avoid Elmer's basement, because man, that guy tenacious. And to show you how much class he had, yeah, I hadn't even been speaking very long, and I just met these guys. And they wanted me to come up there and talk slow for them, and so he came to me right before the meeting where I was speaking, and he said, "Thomas, you know you're the first guy we've ever brought in to this conference, don't you?" I said, "Well, yeah, somebody told me that." And he said, "You know it costs a lot." I said, "Yeah, I know. I bought the ticket. I know how much it cost." And he said, "Well, what I'm telling you is don't you screw this up." That was my grand sponsor. He was real Mr. Velvet. But I got him with the package. He sponsored my guy. He had 10 days seniority on my sponsor, and never let him forget it. I mean, he'd bring it up at a birthday party. You know, I got 10 days more of this sucker here and there. And my guy's the total opposite. You know, he's charisma doesn't even touch him. You know, his name is Cease, and he doesn't know the meaning of cease like we use it. Just an absolute. Anyway, he ran a first store in there, and he did a lot of television promotion trying to get people to buy fur coats. He was so good, he'd sell them to people in Mississippi. I mean, they'd sell fur coats down there. He'd sell them to anybody, whether they wanted one or not. But he was just one of those guys, you know, just a really charming, totally enthusiastic fella. He'd been everything in Alcoholics Anonymous. He founded groups. He did all kinds of stuff, did institutional work. He'd held every service position known to man. He'd been all the way through our local stuff, and there was a delegate to the General Service Conference. He was a Western regional trustee for Canada, and he was a great guy, great leader. If any of you were at the 80 International, my guy was the chairman of the General Service Board and chaired that conference, and it's the only one I had to miss. And it wasn't because of him. He never let me forget it. I just could not go. But he was that was the kind of guy he was. I tell you the other reason that I thought I needed to put some weight on him. When I was up there, now those guys, you talk about being on a trip. Those guys in Prince Albert, and I deliberately use the word guys, they thought that was the epicenter of Alcoholics Anonymous in the entire universe. And they had asked me when I came to plan to stay a week. I mean, they wanted to get their money's worth. And so they, God knows, I have never been so busy in my life. That ticket didn't cost that much. And I thought, geez, they don't ever sleep here. You know, and I was doing stuff at daylight, civic clubs at noon, did television, radio, newspaper, I mean, all with some very, very desperately put together anonymity, but boy, it stretched it. I'll tell you that. Prisons, if there's any place that people sat down, they had me speaking to them for that entire week. And so they were on such a high, that this is it and everybody ought to come here and join AA. I was trying to find something to prick their balloon a little bit. So I had noticed with my keen discerning eye that there were no women in the program. And so I couldn't let that go unchallenged. So I got a bunch of them together, and I said, look, you guys really aren't hitting on much. I guess you don't have women in this province. Yeah, we got women in this province. And I said, we don't. Well, they thought I was lonely. Even with Canada, sometimes there's a communication gap. And they thought I was lonely. And I was single at the time. And I had no clue of what was going on. None of it. I mean, not a hint. But my sponsor, who was to become my sponsor, had a customer who had gone through a kind of a difficult divorce and was sort of in position that she came to mind as somebody that might hook up with me. So he told her that he had a guy in from North Carolina and wanted to know if maybe she'd be interested in having a call from this guy. And she said, no, I'm not going to listen to some stranger from North Carolina. So they agreed to take me to lunch. Now, you talk about scheming alcoholics. We're going to lunch. And she's stationed there to look me over and to see. I didn't know I was auditioning. But she's going to look me over and decide if it's okay. And so I passed. So she did. And so I had no clue any of that was going on. But we dropped by and met her on a Friday night, and we kind of got smitten. And I wasn't. I'd just gone through a divorce a couple years before, and I was sworn to never do that again. I said, "Good God, man, I've done it drunk and sober." Neither worked. What's left? That's. So I said, shoot, I'm busy enough. I'm not gonna mess with that anymore. Doesn't pay to make those kinds of bedrock kinds of decisions because never just a challenging word. So she seduced me, I guess, and I got it was interesting. She was working for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and not on the horse, but she worked in the regional headquarters of Mounted Police. Well, you could imagine with all of the stuff I'm doing, with speaking to everybody that's got ears and within driving distance, and on television and all that, it was talking to town. Did you hear about this guy from North Carolina that's in here, and he's an ex-convict, and now he's a warden of a penitentiary, and so particularly that was sort of a heard of case. After that, we dated once or twice. Normally, if I'm going to get close to somebody, even personal friendships or whatever, I always want them to know who I am. And for some reason, whether they want to or not, I just feel like, in all fairness, I want them to know enough about me to sort of say there's a little warning sign here. If you can stand it, come on in. But otherwise, boogie. And so I hadn't told her, so I took her to dinner Monday night. Now that was right after they had a newspaper reporter that reported the whole meeting with anonymity, with graphic details and all that, and it's on the front page of the newspaper in that city. Well, she went to work Monday morning, and it was the buzz of the Mountie headquarters. Did you hear about this thing? Can you believe that? Yeah. And she's sitting there at her desk. She told me later, thinking, that can't be that nice guy that I was out with. She said, but how many would there be in town? So anyway, that's marriage is not the name of this workshop, by the way. But yeah, it's funny how these relationships come together. And this girl, phenomenal thing. She grew up in I don't know if you're familiar with Nazarene churches here. That is serious religion. That is serious, man. That's about as hard fundamental foundation. Man, they are serious, really serious. And she grew up in that. Her mother practically owned a Nazarene church. Man, I mean, they were absolute diehards. And this girl knew me 2 or 3 times. Then we sort of had something going. Then we communicated back and forth, letters and that. And about 4 months later, she got her family to agree, and she got me to agree to sponsor her on an alien visa, and she moved to North Carolina. And I don't think my sponsor just drove her into that. Maybe did. I don't know. But anyway, there she came, and we didn't stay together. I helped her get a room, and you have to have a sponsor when you come in from another country like that. And so I agreed to sponsor her on that visa to be sure she didn't go on welfare or anything. I helped her get a job. She lived 6 blocks away, and we dated for 3 years, and then we married. Well, I just got caught up in that story, but the whole point was that, you know, this fella, if he gets me into this, the least he can do is help me get through it, you know. And so I took him on as a sponsor, and it served him right. So yeah, I still have him, and not a real good picture at the moment. He'll be celebrating 55 years of sobriety in January, and if I didn't love him, I'll assure you I wouldn't go to Saskatchewan in January, but I'm going to be there for that. And he's had a major stroke. And those things come in a lot of varieties, I suppose. There's some that have a fast track to recovery, and some have exceedingly low, and some not. And apparently he has the exceedingly low type thing. Can't manage for tri-immunity because speech is gone. You know, so it's a situation in that, you know, what made him he is a communicate with advantage. Because I'm not in a place where I have a crisis today. You know, I mean, and this is a two-way relationship. You know, it's not with him. It's not so much what he does; it's who he is that has great value. You know, he's not going to be able to do much in terms of responding or discussing any kind of a heavy issue with me, but he's there, and who he is kind of rounds out that relationship. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with sponsoring the sponsor from time to time. So it's just not it's not the right time to do anything. Now I have, in the context of what I was talking about a little earlier, I have already picked out my next one in case I have to have him. And nobody on this planet knows who he is, especially him. Nobody knows him. Nobody's going to know it because hopefully I'm not going to need him. You never know. But he'll be ready, whether he knows it or not. He'll be my man. I'll tell you about my sponsoring. About my sponsorship stuff. A good part of good sponsorship is helping others to get into it. And so early on, you know, my guys not only encouraged me, but by necessity. You know, I started getting into sponsorship pretty early on, where I was sponsoring other people. You know, I mentioned about when I went to North Carolina, there was a pretty much chaos there. And the guy the real bright fellow that had got radium moved to a different city and was out of range of there. Well, that city was pretty much in shambles in terms of AA. They had, just like the one that didn't answer the letter. I learned later that one, very sadly, that was a group that just disintegrated, and the leader, the senior guy in that group, was on heavy medications, taking pills, and he and his wife burned alive, and so it was not just disregard; it was just inability to respond. It was with that group. But that one went away. It never was much of a group anyway. And the one I was in, there were very few signs of life in that group. We had some live cases, but there were very few signs of life. There, after my guy left, there was me and one old man. He'd be about my age now, but he was an old man, and he was a wonderful guy, but he couldn't. Charge was not his mode. I mean, he just couldn't do it. He meant to, but he couldn't. And it was a bit of a dilemma, you know. As time comes when the weight hits you, you know, and the weight hit me. So I'm standing in the middle of that. The first meeting I went to when I went to that town was the worst meeting I'd ever been to in my life. Yeah, I promise you, if somebody had had a meeting that bad in the institution, somebody would have paid. There ain't no way we'd put up with that kind of junk. And so I grew up on a good, solid, hard-hitting group. Then I move into unbelievable chaos and confusion. And so my first reaction was, man, let's get out of here. You know, I'm 25 miles from a big city, and there was action over there. I visited enough to see. I thought, geez, I'm not going to hang over here in Podunk and wrestle with this. Then a disturbing thought hit me. I'm the second oldest guy there. And the disturbing thought was, when do you take responsibility? You know, when do you step up to the plate? And that was a troubling deal. And my answer was, right now. Yeah, and that's probably one of the wisest decisions I ever made in my life, was to stand and grow where I'm planted, you know, and to take the responsibility for doing stuff. And I'll tell you, I was wildly enthusiastic, but very poorly prepared. I was not ready to start AA in a city. But I was standing right in the middle of it, and I said, well, shoot, let's get it on. And so we started going. And it was interesting, to say the least. To tell you just a couple of just kind of goofy things that we did. Now, when you got vision to do something but very little practical knowledge, it's an adventure. And sometimes it works, sometimes it is something else. Somewhere I'd heard the term public meeting, and somehow that drew a picture in my mind. We rarely do those things now, but they used to be fairly common in AA. That it was owing to those old days where if you want to get alcoholics to know where you are, let people know that you exist. And so the people would hold public meetings and just invite people from the general public to come in to a place and then talk with them about AA. We call that public information. But back then we called it public meetings. And I don't know that I've heard of one for a long time where we actually assemble people around that banner. And so I'd never had anybody explain to me what a public meeting was, but I knew what it sounded like. And I thought, that's what we need in this town. And I was an exuberant young fellow. I was not real smart, but I was absolutely gung-ho to do something, whatever it was. So I just said, it wasn't there just me and the old man is all it was, so it didn't take much to get a group conscience. And so I said, shoot, we need to get a public meeting. I borrowed the sanctuary of the biggest church in town, because not that I would have grandiose ideas, but I knew that we were going to have a bumper crop of citizens in there to tell about us. And I got the word out to everybody. Now, this was new to everybody, you know, so you could attract a crowd on curiosity sometime. And we wound up with 700 people that were signed up to come to that thing, and came. And, well, you know, you got to treat your guests well. So I had a catered dinner served there. Now, bear in mind, I just got out of jail. And I'm broke. I mean, man, you talk broke. I am penniless is what I was. And so here they were. Well, I knew that, and we did the meeting. We did the public information meeting. And I knew that these are sensible citizens. I mean, my God, everybody eats. Everybody knows how much food costs. And so I knew that people, I took big buckets, you know, to hold all the money to send around to those 700 folk. And I knew that everybody would calculate their fair share. I mean, anybody could do that. You know that would be logical. Don't count on it. Yeah, those buckets came back in. I had $47. 47. And I thought, my God, I'm going back to jail for doing God's work. I use the term I very liberally in just telling you about that, because I guarantee you that's what that was, and there has never been another one where I was the operative term. I guarantee you I've had group with me on everything I've done since. It was a learning experience. But it was also, and by the way, I didn't have to go back to jail. It's a funny thing about how we are. Word got around in the surrounding area that Older had done it now, that he's in over his head, and so people understood that. They just sort of came together and put together money, and we paid off that deal with the help of the people who said, let's bail him out. He's not real smart, but he means well, you know. So they saved my day. But that worked. Yeah, that really worked. Yeah, but man, I laugh that and many other things. But that group started to come alive. You know, we started to get real attention. We started to get requests to do follow-up meetings in churches and civic groups and all kinds of stuff. You know, it started to make a functional entity in that town instead of some little thing hidden off somewhere. And so it really did serve the purpose well. And we started getting some real action going in that town. Now, this was long before any such thing as treatment or detoxes or anything like that. We had one little place. I say we. There was some people had one little place over in Charlotte where you could, for $75, you could take somebody over, and they had a kind of it's really a tapering off process. All it was, they'd take them in, and they would just give them decreasing amounts of booze, and in 3 days they'd walk out of there, you know, reasonably roadworthy. And I tell you, I've spent a lot of $75 to get people in there, because, man, I tell you, it's a thrill a minute when you're working with drunks, and there's no place to take them. There's no place what to do. And during those days, I guarantee you, I was dangerous. I didn't realize it, but I was dangerous. I never went on a 12-step call or working with an alcoholic because I didn't have booze with me. I carried it with me. I had it in my trunk, because when you've got somebody in DTs or they're going into convulsions or something, what do? You know, hold their hand? You know, no. I know how to calm down somebody that's wigging out. You know, you put enough of that stuff in them and they'll calm right down. I didn't realize that you can also kill them pretty quick like that. I had no clue. But thank God that it never did happen. You know, but that was all we had. You know, we had one doctor in the county that would, quote, treat an alcoholic if he was going into the monkeys. But the treatment was very dignified. You had to take him around to the back door. You didn't go in with the patients. You take him around to the back door into a kitchen, and he would break off and come back in and shoot him in the rump with something and write a prescription. And that was it. That was the sum total. I was grateful for that. Thank God for that man. So it was an interesting time. And that thing of and I'm about the only guy going. So I'm doing 12-step work, you know, a mile a minute. And everybody reads the same stuff I do. I imagine that that 12-step calls, with a few notable exceptions, and this area being one of them, 12-step calls are almost a relic of the past. That they just don't happen that much. There are clearly some action here that's going on in that regard. But back then, I guarantee you, there was plenty to go around. They talk about having. I probably haven't had more than half a dozen in the last year. I've had 3 at one time. Never mind 3 in one day. I've had 3 at one time. Now, if you want to have some fun, you get 3 drunks in a car. Man, I'd have the one with 30 minutes sobriety holding the one with 15 and trying to load up the one with none, So I guarantee you it was fun time with all of that stuff. Good God. I learned a few lessons in doing that. It's kind of sneaking into the next session, but when you're the only guy standing, we're an equal opportunity place whether we wanted to be or not. We didn't have any men or women back then, and women posed an interesting dilemma. I don't say no. I mean, what are you going to tell somebody to do when you're the only one there? Say, no, I don't do that? No, I didn't. And the first one I got, I went. And I saw the wisdom of women working with women and men working with men. And I mean, I don't think I'm Robert Redford or any of those guys, but what I ran into in working with women is that most women have had some really disappointing, disturbing, or all kinds of radical kind of relationship that have jaundiced them a bit. And what I saw was that everybody from teeny boppers to grandmothers, that when I would go in and they would see kindness and sincerity and warmth, everybody went through a little period of just kind of not understanding the feeling and thinking it was some kind of a romantic connection. And so I did one time by myself, and I can catch on fairly quick. I said, that ain't smart. And now there were no women members. My mother made more 12-step calls than most members have ever dreamed of. I told her, you got to protect your baby boy. And so she'd go, and I'd take mother, my sister, girlfriends, hitchhikers. I'd take anybody. But I'm going to have me a woman in that thing. It's an interesting challenge. Anyway, that's 10,000 stories go with that. And by the way, my prayers were finally answered when, believe it or not, a gal came in from California that was already sober. None of mine has made it, but I had one that made 3 months, and I wanted to just give her the Nobel Prize, just for making it that long. But a gal came in from out here, and I swear to God, she was an interesting person. She had the California style. You just kind of look a little bit larger than life and a little bit slicker and quicker, and she came in. She was wearing rocks that would just weigh your hands down. And I guarantee you, those redneck gals down there were not real keen about her. If she even got close to a husband, they'd be right there watching. But boy, I tell you, I loved her dearly. I took care of that girl. I sponsored 2 women. She's one of them. She's still living, and she's 43 years sober now. And who was going to turn her over to? So I figured she was safe. And I took her on. I'm not going to disrupt it. She's not either. And then I sponsored one other one that a guy literally left to me in his will. And she said, "Gee, thanks. No money. I got Big Red." Is what okay. But those just great times, and But boy, that was great. And it just sort of took off. And I think, the thing Debbie's told me I got to start quitting. I tell you one thing I want to sort of wrap that. Now, obviously, when I'm the only guy that's really breathing and moving, I sponsored a lot of people. I sponsored everybody in town. And it was really interesting. It was more than interesting. It was really a learning experience. I sponsored a herd of guys, and Jean, the girl, and we were incredibly busy at the time. We were incredibly active. Back then, there was not any real thoughtful kinds of introduction to the program or newcomer groups or big book studies or taking people through the steps. Those things hadn't even been thought of, much less implemented anywhere, and certainly not there. And so we were characterized by just wild, crazy activity of just day and night banging away. And so all the guys I sponsored, I will promise you that had there been an election for the best sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous, it would have been me to those guys. Who else would it be? And they loved me and respected me. I didn't realize till much later that that's not enough. That if what they saw from me was I was the solution. And AA worked by getting in the car and let's go. And we'd go somewhere. And anything I told them to do, they'd do it in a heartbeat. Man, they'd just jump right in and go. When I left town after about 2 years, we had 60 members in that group, so it's some good stuff. But when I left town, everyone but one got drunk. Now that rattled the old boy's cage a little, cause that'll make you to it. And then what I realized was that they were so busy watching me that I never did take the time to tell them the solution. And so, sponsorship is a lot more than just driving and herding and, all of this kind of stuff. It taught me that. And so it was a valuable kind of a learning experience. And so, anyway, it's part of what sort of sensitized me to the real task of sponsorship. And now, when we come back, what we'll do is switch, and we want to start thinking about. Just give you a little something to think about while you drink coffee. We want to move into a brainstorming mode, and really start putting together a design for sponsorship. A design, and so what we're going to do. Somebody's going to write. Somebody's going to write for me because mine's not legible. And we'll look at some concerns, some areas that are important in developing sponsorship. And when we get through here with that session, which will move pretty quick, I think, when we get through with that, what we're going to have is an absolute state-of-the-art model for how to develop perfect sponsorship. And then we'll sell it on eBay and market. No, but that's what we'll do, is try to come up with that. So let's take, what are we taking, 15? Take about an AA 15 minutes, and then we'll get going.
All right.